Good morning, everybody. Of course, there's nobody there yet. I'm a little bit early, but I will be signing in here pretty quick. And in so doing, K-Talk, the tower is down. There's still some power problems at the tower that hopefully they can try to get addressed over the weekend. I'm not sure all of the engineering that's involved, but we should be back up at K-Talk before the end of the day today. So I'm just going to do a couple of comments that I wanted to make to the stream, because that's the only platform I have right now. And as I was going through the news, there's several news items that I would like to bring up. And I was looking through an old New York Times article that I thought was pretty good, talking about the head of the National Counterterrorism Center examining the FBI files in the last several weeks to investigate whether the man charged with assassinating Charlie Kirk, and I'm turning on, I assume I am coming through okay. I didn't stop to check my broadcast signal, which probably wouldn't be a good idea, wouldn't be a bad idea right now to do, to make sure that, yeah, it looks like I'm coming through just fine. All right. Looking into whether the man that was charged with assassinating Charlie Kirk had support from someone else. Now, this is an older article. This is towards the end of October. And how much did we know towards the end of October as to what we know now? Because you don't hear anything about it anymore, do you? No, because they know the jig is up. And we know that Robinson had help, a foreign power, some other entity, according to the multiple people with knowledge of the matter. And the inquiry by Joe Kent, as reported in the New York Times, who was at the time, the director of the Counterterrorism Center, as far as I know, he still is, verbally alarmed Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, and other senior officials who believed that Kent was overstepping his bounds, treading on FBI responsibilities and potentially interfering with the investigation and the prosecution of the suspect, Tyler Robinson. Kind of reminds you a little bit, I think, of what happened with the cover-up of Kennedy. Anyway, supporters of Mr. Kent, say he was just doing his job, running down leads and making sure that no foreign or domestic groups were linked to Mr. Kirk's death. So Robinson, the only one accused so far of killing Kirk, made an appearance. I guess it was videotaped from the courtrooms, the last time we've seen anything. But he now, of course, is charged with 7 counts, including felony aggravated murder. The Senate confirmed Kent as director of the Counterterrorism Center in July. He is one of the closest advisors to Tulsi Gabbard. In fact, I think it was Tulsi Gabbard that swore him into office. And he shares her focus on traditional terrorism groups as well as drug cartels, which he argues almost daily are a grave threat to the United States. Anyway, Patel was troubled that Kent had gone overboard, going through FBI material that was related to the case, according to people who were knowledgeable in the matter. And so Kent's efforts were a topic at a White House meeting that included Kash Patel, Mr. Kent, and his direct supervisor, Tulsi Gabbard. And the top justice officials, Vice President Vance, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, were also there, according to people who gave this information to the New York Times about the matter. And the people interviewed by the Times were granted anonymity to speak frankly about the internal dynamics inside the Trump administration concerning this issue. So the Times, that's the thing that triggered my attention. The Times were granted anonymity. By whom? Who told the Times people that they could give this kind of information directly out of the FBI, directly out of the Department of Counterterrorism, directly out of Director of National Intelligence Office? They could say what they wanted to say without having to identify themselves. The president? Because if a source wants anonymity for a story, the journalists usually just state, well, they're speaking off the record. So the above idea of being granted anonymity suggests express permission granted by the White House for them to speak with the New York Times. That always gets a out of me. So the FBI and the Justice Department generally keep a rather tight fist over evidence in criminal cases, particularly when they're preparing for a trial in which government documents have to be turned over to the defense and could be used to poke holes in the prosecution's case. We're all familiar with that kind of court procedure. But while Mr. Robinson is, I think, still in the local jail, is facing only state charges, some administration officials are concerned that Mr. Kent's efforts to pry into where they think his nose didn't belong could provide fodder for the defense lawyers who could use the notion that more than one person was involved in Kirk's killing to raise reasonable doubt in the mind of the jurors, said those who were aware of the matter. Well, where are you going to find a jury of Mr. Robinson's peers in Utah who actually believe he did this all by himself? Where would you find anybody that believes that? I mean, anybody who's watched the news, anybody that's listened to the alt news of the ballistics experts, the security experts, who all swear up and down there were several people that were involved, and there's no way on this earth that a 30-06 from 150 yards away wouldn't have ripped Mr. Kirk's head right off of his shoulders. And to suggest the bullet went deeper into his body and his body stopped the bullet is just absolute nonsense. So since his death, Kirk's death, some of the White House officials have pressed for sweeping federal investigations of the liberal groups and donors. Some of the president's allies outside the administration are convinced that the killing is part of a broader plot. They said, despite a lack of evidence that's been presented to support that. Well, there's some pretty good evidence. When the only nation on the face of the earth 2 days after the murder says, we didn't do it. 2 days after he turned down $150 million to his organization to start giving pro-Israel statements. Yeah. Anyway, they said that the administration is having a hard time believing that there was a broader plot because of a lack of evidence that's been presented. Presented where? Presented to whom? I mean, the media just ignores the piles of evidence that Candace Owens and other citizen journalists have compiled to show that Robinson, as in many cases in the past, is just a patsy. And some among Kirk's security detail were on it. And Kirk was in the midst of making significant changes to his organization that would potentially impact the U.S. political scene. And the Israeli government took an unusual interest in both Kirk's death and legacy, as I said. So officials involved in the arrest have said they believe Robinson acted alone. Yeah. Mr. Kent told administration officials that the lower-level FBI official had granted him access to the agency's files, which Patel said he wasn't aware of. I wonder if somebody got fired over that one. So Kent did see them, or some of them, but someone on the inside, obviously of the deep state apparatus, alerted Patel to the move and thereby blocked Gabbard from being able to get any more information. So they all sit down with the president in the Oval Office to come to some kind of a resolve. Anyway, in response to questions from the time, I mean, what does this do to your opinion of Kash Patel? Does it do what it's done to me? Anyway, Patel and Gabbard released a joint statement that did not address the debate over Mr. Kent's inquiry, but they're trying to portray a unified front. So they said this: the FBI and the intelligence community, under the direction of President Trump, will leave no stone unturned in the investigation of the assassination of our friend, Charlie Kirk. But there were several people present who said tensions over Mr. Kent's work had persisted for some time and were part of a broader set of issues between Gabbard's office and other administration agencies. And the meeting that Kent attended at the White House was one of two intended to try to ameliorate the tensions between the FBI and Gabbard's office. And the people briefed on the matter said that it's rather tenuous. The earlier one, which focused on multiple issues, including the killing of Kirk, was so tense that little was accomplished. Now imagine you're in this meeting with Tulsi Gabbard, Joe Kent, Kash Patel, Mrs. Wiles, Chief of Staff, and the President. And those who witnessed this said the meeting was so tense that very little was accomplished. What do you suppose they were saying back and forth between them that was so tense? Well, let me ask a couple of questions that might clarify. Is President Trump a Zionist? Is Kash Patel a Zionist? Do they both have reason to satisfy the Israeli lobby? I could go a lot further on that, but in lieu of the time involved, I think you're schooled enough by now. You can answer that question for yourself. So in the hours after, and so you can imagine why things were so tense. Tulsi Gabbard wants the truth. Joe Kent wants the truth. Kash Patel does not want the truth displayed. President Trump does not want the truth let out. And President Trump's in a position to fire everybody in the room, including his chief of staff. So he has the Trump card. Trump is carrying the Trump card. Then they have another meeting. And then the next meeting says, we will leave no stone unturned. So in the hours after Mr. Kirk's execution, before Robinson was identified as the suspect, officials across the American intelligence agencies were already investigating whether any foreign government was involved in the plot to kill Charlie Kirk. I can't help but laughing. Citizen journalists were doing so. The agencies had their thumbs where the sun doesn't shine for at least 2 days, while tens of millions online, literally tens of millions, rapidly pieced together the context in which Kirk was whacked, and thus the motive. And the most likely culprit, of course, was Israel, because Israel was the one who stood to lose the most by a change in Charlie Kirk's tactics with Turning Point. So some officials inside the government were raising questions about the assassin's abilities and training after security footage was released of him jumping from a high ledge without a gun, mind you. And early in the investigation, evidence was collected that contained words often associated with anti-fascist writing, namely the inscriptions on bullets that were found in the rifle that had killed Mr. Kirk. So in the charging document, prosecutors included a text message from Mr. Robinson that claimed that the inscriptions were mostly a big internet meme. And the Counterterrorism Center gathered material from intelligence agencies about potential foreign ties to Robinson, and also looked at foreign funding of people who identify with the far left movement, Antifa. So Trump said Mr. Robinson was radicalized by the left, although the president has not directly tied him to Antifa. But after Mr. Kirk's killing, Trump said he was designating Antifa as a terrorist organization, and you know the rest from there. You know, Antifa is just a term, anti-fascist, anti-fascist, for very violent protesters of far-left activists. It's not an actual organization. It's more of a movement. Several critics have questioned what legal criteria the president is using to make such a designation about a diffuse movement with no clear leader. Anyway, under Mr. Kent, the National Counterterrorism Center has taken a higher profile than in years past. They, besides the Charlie Kirk execution, they've been issuing warnings about potential terrorist attacks and highlighting the work to aid Mexico in hunting down the leaders of the cartels. But some of Mr. Kent's work say he's pushing his center into areas that should be left to the FBI or the CIA. So when you get a patriot like Joe Kent, who gets into a position where he's the director of national counterterrorism, what kind of intel would he be able to get his hands on? What kind of security updates would he be getting every day from his own internal intelligence services? And if he were to find in this gathering of intel, especially insider information from the FBI or the CIA, that they know a lot more than they're speaking about publicly, is he out of his lane in investigating further information that might be considered the territory of the FBI or the CIA? So in other words, Tulsi Gabbard, through Joe Kent, is trying to do what she can to pry open the tightly guarded vaults, pry open the tightly guarded vaults of the deep state fortress, which is, and what, if you were to open the vault doors of the deep state, what would be the first thing you would see? Not a personality. Think of that for a moment. You know, like if you could spend a couple of hours in the Vatican Library, not just the Vatican Library, but the sealed portions of the Vatican Library, what do you suppose you would discover? What's one of the first things that you would see? You know, only your imagination could have some fun with that. Well, suppose you were able to look into the vault of the deep state. The first thing you would see is the intelligence community. Anytime you hear about something that happens or has gone on or has grabbed your attention, don't you want more information about it? There's something like over 20 some recognized intelligence agencies, organizations in the federal government. All the branches of the armed services all have their intelligence communities. So at least we now know that Tulsi Gabbard knows that Charlie Kirk was whacked by pros. We know she knows that. Does Trump know that? Does he even care about what they did to Charlie Kirk? And who did it? Because if in fact it was a Mossad operation, and the president seems to be rather deeply controlled by that agency, or at least by Netanyahu, I can understand why he wants to put this on the back burner. I mean, what a damning indictment of American democracy that the director of national intelligence, the very top of all the intelligence community that comes together, and one of her subordinates, as the director of counterterrorism, have to resort to clandestine efforts to gain access to U.S. government information by reaching out to lower level officials in the hope that they can be snuck into the back door for the chance to read up on the FBI investigation into the most high-profile political assassination in this country in decades. That was the whole purpose for me talking about this. And for Kash Patel, I don't know what they got on him, but they got something. All right. I want to talk about Ukraine for a moment. The Telegraph has previously quoted another former officer as estimating that Kyiv's forces are short 200,000 troops. Why? You know, somebody, Alexei, go out there and count them. See if we've got as many as we sent out. Comes back, we got a problem. I can't find 200,000 of our troops. Well, they're dead. No. They're not among the dead. They're not among the dismembered who are still alive. They're just flat out missing. So the Ukrainian military is facing a very severe desertion problem. Sergei Filimonov, the commander of the elite 108th Separate Assault Battalion, nicknamed Da Vinci Wolves, said this, and this was posted on X last Wednesday to his subscribers. He said this: "How surprised would you be if I told you that another newly formed brigade is being put together from the ranks of the 150th, which at the stage of formation already has 3,000 absent without leave?" This was on X. Who is this fellow? The commander of one of the elite battalions of the Ukrainian army, called Da Vinci Wolves. And he has a mess of subscribers to his X channel. And he says, how surprised would you be? I have to repeat it. I mean, this is substantial. How surprised would you be if I told you that another newly formed brigade is being put together from the ranks of the 150th, which at the stage of formation already has 3,000 of them absent without leave? So in a piece last Friday, the Telegraph's contributor Owen Matthews said this: perhaps as many as 20,000 Ukrainian service members desert or go absent every 4 weeks. And according to the publication, since the escalation of the conflict, which is, we're coming up to 4 years here in February, the Ukrainian authorities have launched 290,000 criminal cases for desertion. The Ukrainian government. So Matthews went on to claim that Kyiv's military may be as much as 200,000 soldiers short of the minimum that's needed to fend off the Russian advances. So the journalist cited several current and former Ukrainian officers as complaining that frontline units were operating at half or even a third of their required strength. So last week, the Telegraph reported that nearly 100,000 young men had left Ukraine after the government allowed aged 18 to 22 to cross the border in August. So previously, as part of Ukraine's general mobilization, all able-bodied men aged 18 to 60 had been barred from leaving the country. Just think about that here. I mean, conscription is one thing, but being in the age group of conscription, you know, in Vietnam, when we had so many of our young men go to Canada, you can't do that anymore because the treaties between Canada and the United States, Canada would pick you up and bring you right back to the United States, should something like that happen again today. But when you're not allowed to leave the country, where border crossings prevent you from leaving your own country, what does that make your country? Well, yeah, a concentration camp. That same month, a newspaper claimed that since 2022, at least 650,000 Ukrainian men of fighting age have fled the Ukraine. 650,000. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian military police telling local media that the number of deserters in the country's military by then had reached almost 400,000. So territorial centers of recruitment and social support in the Ukraine, who are tasked with enforcing Ukraine's mobilization drive, have faced widespread public criticism because they're the group out there grabbing them off the street, throwing them in a van, driving them to the front lines, giving them a helmet and a gun, and go shoot. Multiple eyewitness videos have been circulating on social media, which is where a lot of this comes from, depicting draft officers. So that, you know, we've all seen these. I'm not just pulling this out of my hat that they pick them up. They're videos. Military-aged men on the streets shoving these young boys into vans, and it's called busification, a practice known colloquially in the Ukraine as busification. Such oppressed gangs are often seen using brute force, even threatening the reluctant recruits with guns to their face if they don't get in the van. Now, who in their right mind would hang around to have their brains blown out in the name of Zelensky's fatal folly? I mean, there's always the white flag, but you know, nothing like letting the enemy know how weak you are. This is why I think, in my humble military opinion, Putin changed a lot of their battle tactics on the front line from face-to-face engagement to just bombardment, just sending in drones. These are, you know, the small drones. The kind of, you could go to Best Buy, buy one of these drones, and you put a grenade on it. It's just amazing what's happened with frontline warfare. But you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of these drones, most of which you got from Iran, and Russia has them. You tie a grenade to it, and you fly it in there with the camera, and you see the enemy soldier, and you buzz right into him and blow his head off. Now, that's more expensive than a bullet, but you don't lose any of your own armed forces for doing this. And when the Ukrainian front line sees these things coming, what are they going to do? Because they dog you. They follow you all around until they You run around behind a tree, it comes behind the tree. You run around behind a tank, it comes around behind the tank. As long as it's got power to keep itself afloat. And finally, boom, it comes right in on you and you're dead. Now, who wouldn't run from that? And so, when this kind of information comes out on Telegraph, hey, we're putting this new elite group together, and they're going to go in there, and like where eagles dare, they're going to go in there and take out the military leadership of Russia. And, oh, by the way, we've already got 3,500 AWOL members of the group. What's that tell the Russians? The Russian war councils and the War Department. What's that tell them? Just keep this going a little bit longer. The war's over. There's only so many desertions before there's nothing left. And we're saving Russian lives. Just keep going. I mean, these mainstream media headlines make it really hard to believe that this is a real war anymore and not completely staged to serve some agenda. Because you constantly hear about the resolve of the European Union and their dedication to the Ukrainian fight. Yet almost every country in the European Union is harboring within their own borders the very fighting age men the Ukraine supposedly needs. Now think about that. So you got these various of Germany, Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, probably as far as France, some of the bordering countries, Bulgaria, Romania, Moldova. This is where these 200,000, probably more than that, deserters have run off to. And these are the same countries who are trying to take money from the social programs in their own country to give that money to the Ukraine to fight the war, yet they offer protection for the Ukrainian soldiers who have deserted and come into their country. Does that sound like a real war? I mean, what really doesn't make any sense here is allowing these 18 to 22-year-olds in their latest program to skip the show. I mean, why don't they need to be killed off too? I just find it very interesting. Abducted off the street, hardly any military training, not enough ammunition because they're constantly running out, not enough food. We're going into winter. Commanders leaving them to fend for themselves once they're attacked. Can you imagine for a moment why there's so much desertion? And now, as a part of the drama as this continues, NATO wants to deploy 800,000 troops in case of war with Russia, so says a German general. NATO needs to put together in service now 800,000 troops. Have they not learned anything from what's going on in Ukraine? So Lieutenant General Alexander Salfrank is warning that such a clash with Russia could happen as early as tomorrow. So Berlin is prepared for war with Moscow, stands ready to facilitate the deployment of 800,000 NATO troops toward Russian border. This lieutenant general says. So the hypothetical deployment is part of Operational Plan Germany, which was revealed last year, and the 1,000-page long document governs Berlin's response if Article 5 of the NATO treaty is triggered in a confrontation with Moscow. Now remember the unsaid words of President Trump here a few months ago at a conference in Europe where he was asked if Article 5 was called upon would America come to the aid of NATO? Well, he didn't say yes. And that includes the whole idea of Article 5 triggering a confrontation with Moscow, is it would include turning Germany into a major logistics hub for the deployment of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and pieces of equipment from various NATO nations against Russia. And the deployment would have to be completed within 180 days of the start of the conflict. And according to this lieutenant general, the plan has to be implemented now. This was just spoken at a conference in Berlin on Friday. He said Russia possesses a very large military potential despite the war in Ukraine. Russia is already capable of launching a limited attack on NATO territory, which is what they keep saying all the time, which is the last thing Russia wants to do. So speaking to Reuters the same day, this general claimed that Moscow could do it as early as tomorrow. Russia could be attacking NATO nations as early as tomorrow. So Merz, the German chancellor, has previously declared that diplomatic options for resolving the Ukraine conflict are exhausted and doubled down on providing more and more weapons for Kyiv, just when the United States started turning its back on this war, leaving it to the European nations to do something about this. So last Friday, both he and his defense minister, Boris Pistorius, who was the one who said Germany must be war ready with Russia by 2029, said that Germany's existence in its present form is threatened by Russia. He says, this is not alarmism when I say that our way of life is in danger. Who is he kidding? Look at the deindustrialization that's taking place in Germany. Look at the at Wolfsburg and the other big center. It begins with an S. Where 20%, 1 in 6 Germans are involved in auto manufacturing. So when you think of Mercedes and Audi and Porsche and Volkswagen, the major industrial areas where these vehicles are being manufactured has suffered such critical losses of manpower that some of these things are starting to shut down. If you're considering getting a German-made automobile in the next year or so that's going to need German replacement parts, you might want to keep this in mind. And one Volkswagen plant has now been converted to manufacturing tanks. So with the deindustrialization of Germany that's going on, the collapse of their social structure, the rise of the AfD, the alternate for Deutschland, the right wing, the Trumpers of Germany, getting more and more power right now, more as I speak, getting more support, more power, because they want to stop this nonsense with Russia. Moscow has repeatedly said they have no intention of attacking NATO. It also dismissed Berlin's claims as nonsense that was aimed at justifying the skyrocketing military spending at the expense of the social order of Germany. And Foreign Minister Lavrov previously warned Germany that what Germany is doing has clear signs of re-Nazification of 1930s Germany. Politico reported that last month Germany's rearmament plans would cost 377 billion euros, about 440 billion American dollars. So Europe is ramping up, finalizing their excuses and false accusations, because, and I think this may be one of the main reasons why Trump has turned his back on all of this. And he's not going to send tomahawks. I think Putin got to it, or Lavrov got to Rubio. Let him know what would happen if American Tomahawk showed up in Germany or Russia. And they've already demonstrated what they could do with the Orishnik. And then here, 2 weeks ago, the Beresvishnik and the Poseidon submarines, what these things are capable of doing worldwide. And then all of a sudden, Trump says, "Well, we got to do some more nuclear testing." And Kremlin spokesman, I probably will finish with this. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov used a Sunday, I guess just yesterday, interview with a Russian journalist that President Vladimir Putin has given no instructions at all to launch preparations for nuclear weapons testing, despite what President Trump said, that the U.S. would be carrying out their own tests because other countries are doing so. So Peskov says the president gave no instructions to begin preparations. First of all, we must understand whether we should even do it. This must be a serious, well-founded, thought-out decision. So our specialists are working on that. He also said this, quote, Putin has repeatedly stated that Russia is committed to its nuclear test ban obligations, and we have no intention of violating them. If another country does this, well, then we will be obliged to do so in order to maintain parity, one of the most important components of global security architecture. I mean, how do you look at this? What's in my cup? Water. Isaac. It's water. Just plain old water. Spring water, as a matter of fact. Good, clean spring water. I've got some more things here, but I think the tower will be up and working at K-Talk tomorrow. And I'd like to get a little early start in my office. So I think that's enough for this morning. Just what's it break down to? Well, Kash Patel is a serious disappointment. Pete Hegseth is a serious disappointment. The only thing left is Tulsi Gabbard, of the three that I was really pushing for there at the beginning of the Trump administration. I think she's still a bit of a hero. That's why you hardly ever hear anything from her. It's because she's being kept out of the news, because she will say things embarrassing to the administration. And so why does President Trump keep her in this position? Because he knows she's damn good at what she's doing. And he knows that her information is vital, despite the fact of the deep state big mouths that are surrounding him. So as long as he listens to people like Hegseth and Rubio and Thune and Johnson and the other avowed Zionists in our government, I think he's still trying to keep a back door open somewhere. I really hope and pray that's the truth. All right, you all keep your wits about you out there. Be good. Be nice to each other. I'm going to end the stream a little early today, as I said, to get off to work. But I'll see you all tomorrow.